Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 17th of December, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me in the studio today is Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And Vanessa, Beeley and Mark Anderson join us live by video link. And later in the programme, we're going to be asking what happens to our health data. Vanessa's going to have more on the Bondi Beach incident. Charles will be reporting on the spat between the Metropolitan Police and the Freemasons. And Mark is going to report on the childhood vaccination schedule in the United States. But we're going to begin today with comments by the recently appointed head of MI6, Charles.
We are, and in fact, not just her, but it certainly appears that the one infrastructure project the government is on top of is the construction of the path to war. And this week is notable for the coincidence of two speeches and some very joined-up messaging from the state, they being the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, and the Chief of the General Staff. So we're going to look first at what Blaise Metraweli, who's taken over recently as C, said. Now, given what she did go on to speak about, I think it should be noted that she is the granddaughter of Konstantin Dobrovolsky, who was a Russian collaborator with the Nazis in what is now Ukraine during the Second World War. And although she never knew her grandfather, this is a difficult detail to ignore totally. We'll just start with the video that sets the tone for her speech.
I'm going to break with tradition, and I won't give you a global threat tour, but I will focus here on Putin's Russia. We all continue to face the menace of an aggressive, expansionist and revisionist Russia seeking to subjugate Ukraine and harass NATO. I find it harrowing that hundreds of thousands have died, with the toll mounting every day because of Putin's historical distortions and his compromised desire for respect. He is dragging out negotiations and shifting the cost of war onto his own population. But Putin should be in no doubt. Our support is enduring. The pressure we apply on Ukraine's behalf will be sustained. Because it is fundamental not just to European sovereignty and security, but to global stability. Alongside the grinding war, Russia is testing us in the grey zone with tactics that are just below the threshold of war. It's important to understand their attempts to bully, fearmonger, and manipulate because it affects us all. I'm talking about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, drones buzzing, airports and bases, aggressive activity in our seas above and below the waves, state-sponsored arson and sabotage, propaganda and influence operations that crack open and exploit fractures within societies.
The only thing she hasn't tried to mention there is yellow cake.
Indeed, not yet anyway. But much of what she said could, of course, be applied to these shores and what's going on here. But instead, she wants to direct all attention away from every other country on Earth and ensure that it's directed at Russia. She's referring to historical distortions, again, something that's very much been going on this side of the channel. The phrase that she used, which is of particular interest, is just below the threshold of war. And that causes us to look back at the integrated operating concept, which was withdrawn in June of this year. And I quote, in response on the integrated operating concept, in response to what they're identifying as a threat, they say that it establishes the need to compete below the threshold of war, and it distinguishes between operating and war fighting. So in actual fact, the suggestion that we are not going to supposedly stoop to Russia's level seems to be not exactly reinforced by current doctrine. Mike, I wonder if you had a comment specifically on this.
Well, we like to project onto other people what we do ourselves. That was our doctrine, and suddenly it's become Russia's doctrine. This is absolutely what we constantly do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, blame everybody else and then do it yourself. She then goes on to talk about how should we respond.
The export of chaos is a feature, not a bug, in this Russian approach to international engagement. And we should be ready for this to continue until Putin is forced to change his calculus. So, how should we respond? It's not enough now just to understand the world. we must shape it too. MI6 is well positioned to respond to these threats and wider global instability, and we will continue to evolve, just as we have throughout our long history. The UK government has invested in our intelligence agencies, and we are all using our unique powers to keep the British people safe. Our open and connected partnerships across the UK intelligence community with HMGCC, NSIF and the wider tech ecosystem in the UK will become even more important, because in the digital battleground, no single organisation can prevail alone.
Now, considering the references to investment and her concluding sentence there, no single organisation can prevail alone, the undertone there is that there is acknowledgement that the United Kingdom is well out of its depth and really doesn't have sufficient equipment or manpower to deal with the threats that she is conjuring. So therefore, there's an increased need for the use of the private sector, which is articulated by the UK's modern industrial strategy, among other documents. But this was published last month. And within the text there, it says that it's to ensure that procurement strategically supports our industrial strategy priorities and creates high-quality jobs and skills in our local communities and supports sectors critical to national security. Now, as part of this, there's going to be a great reliance on the National Security Strategic Investment Fund, which is described as being the UK's deep tech venture capital fund for national security and defence. So what we're really talking about here is off-the-shelf procurement by way of venture capital, control of which goes straight to the fund that I've just been talking about, the National Security Strategy Investment Fund. And I think this is really an example of what's been described as the defence dividend playing out in real time. And now, of course, we get to the people and who is going to be bearing responsibility for any of these actions that had come in due course. And we'll just listen to hear what she had to say about the future.
But the response to the increasing risks we face won't be delivered by the UK intelligence community alone. Wider society has a role to play too. That includes work taking place in schools across the country, so our children don't get duped by information manipulation. Let's all check sources, consider evidence, and be alive to those algorithms that trigger intense reactions like fear. It also means everyone in society really understanding the world we're in, a world where terrorists plot against us, where our enemies fearmonger, bully and manipulate, and the front line is everywhere. Online, on our streets, in our supply chains, in the minds and on the screens of our citizens. We must all stand together against this.
So you're saying that the integrated operating concept has been withdrawn, but she's just expressed it yet again, because if you remember, the other part of that was the idea that foreign ventures are no longer the only front. There's also the front at home, and now she's basically reiterating that point.
She is indeed, absolutely, and wrapping it up as part of this whole of society approach, which was written large across the Strategic Defence Review and the National Security Strategy of this year. But of course, this is directed specifically at children, with the references there to getting into schools and educating people from an early age. Now, coincident with this, also on Monday, the Chief of the Defence Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, spoke at the Royal United Services Institute on basically exactly the same theme, talking about the long-term success and reconnecting society with the armed forces. Supported by what he describes as a national conversation, and he wants to push that forward. Now, he said also specifically he will argue that the situation is more dangerous than I have known during my career, and the price of peace is rising, and our response needs to go beyond simply strengthening our armed forces. He went on again, hammering the same point. It needs a whole-of-nation response, building defence industrial capacity, to enhance the resilience of society and the infrastructure that supports it. Of course, it should be borne in mind that the government's doing very little on that front when we consider the capabilities of, or at least the restriction on farmers, farmland, and reliance on food from abroad, reduced access to water, and in particular, of course, energy, as it's sabotaged by the net zero agenda and the massive consumption from data centres and AI in particular. Now, he also spoke about the probability of an attack by Russia, or of Russia and one or more NATO states being in conflict by 2027. He used AI to produce this prediction, which he actually relied upon to write his speech in the first place. Now, he also talked about more people being ready to fight for their country and said that there were over 100,000 applications to join the armed forces last year, but only 13,000 successful applicants. And it's interesting to note the Army website says on its joining as a non-UK national page that they're no longer inviting applications from Commonwealth nationals, except, strangely enough, for musicians. So it should be perfectly clear to anyone listening that both Metrowelli and Knighton are politicians, first and foremost, installed to drive the state's propaganda. And an important distinction to note between the two speakers is their respective levels of operational experience. She describes herself as operational to the core, whereas Knighton has virtually no operational experience whatsoever. And this disparity may well point towards the focus when it does come to prosecuting war. The delivery of kinetic effects is looking less likely to be on the main effort. Now, both speeches are printed in full on the government website, and I would recommend reading them in full. There'll be links to the show notes. I'll just conclude by reading a tweet from the Russian embassy to the UK, which in effect is responding to these speeches and says very explicitly, Russia has no plans, intentions, or reasons for entering into an armed confrontation with the UK.
Okay, well, part of what she said was the rise of intelligence, as if we haven't had enough of that from military intelligence anyway. But the UK military intelligence is apparently going to be more efficient, faster, and better able to anticipate future threats as the Ministry of Defence launches the new military intelligence services. And that's according to the Ministry of Defence. This has been done following recommendations in Strategic Defence Review that Charles just mentioned. The Military Intelligence Services brings under centralised control, they say, intelligence units from the Royal Navy, the British Army, the Royal Air Force, UK Space Command, and the Permanent Joint Headquarters, ensuring they operate as one system, speeding up how information is gathered, analysed, and shared across the armed forces. So that's what they have to say about it. Now, this operation was launched by the Minister for Armed Forces, Alistair Cairns, at RAF Wyton in Cambridgeshire. And this is a key intelligence site which houses, quotes, top secret intelligence from across the Five Eyes partnership. Some selected journalists were brought for a briefing and they were given a tour and they were told that the shadow war is knocking on Europe's door once more. I mean, Blaise was talking about the fear agenda and we're just being bombarded with it from them. The journalists were also warned that the next major conflict is likely to cause more casualties than any UK deployment for decades and would not be a war of choice. So anyway, the MIS will be commanded by Cyber and Specialist Operations Command, and it's going to be led by this man, Adrian Byrd, who's the Chief of Defence Intelligence. The Starmer regime is also in parallel creating a new Defence Intelligence Academy to offer what they describe as world-class training in key intelligence disciplines such as cyber, space, and geospatial analysis. And as we see from their useful infographic here, the basis for all this is that unnamed adversaries are intensifying their hybrid war on Britain with increasing cyber attacks, disruptions of satellites, threats to global shipping lanes, increasing disinformation, and as Blaise was saying, of course, all those naughty drone attacks that we're being told about constantly that don't really exist. But on top of that, they're also launching the Defence Counterintelligence Unit because they claim hostile intelligence activity against the Ministry of Defence has risen by more than 50%. And they then go on to say, would you believe, that the Dawn Sturgis inquiry published last week made clear that foreign intelligence services are now operating far beyond traditional espionage norms, targeting defence personnel, technology programs, supply chains, and wider defence industry, both at home and overseas. So if anybody is still laughing at that, I just remind everybody that last Thursday we held this event in Salisbury entitled Skripal and Novichok, What Didn't Happen. So if you want to know just how real the Dawn Sturgis inquiry report is, and you haven't seen those presentations yet, then please do head onto the UK Column website and watch it, because the fact that they had the gall to cite that particular report is just spectacular, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah. And we look forward to seeing what the product will be from combining all the various intelligence in the same place.
Absolutely. So let me welcome Vanessa to the program. Vanessa, obviously, the weekend saw events in Australia kicking off, and just give us your take on it then.
Well, of course, it wasn't only Australia. There was the event in Rhode Island at Brown University, also in a number of incidents in Syria, which I'll talk about later in the news. I'm looking into the Bondi Beach incident, and I have to say the pushback was almost immediate that this was a false flag, and many other variations on that kind of narrative. I'm not reaching any conclusions. So what I've tried to do here is just bring together some of the information that we now have, and some of the opinions that are gathering traction in social media and in various media outlets. But first of all, the first point I want to make was that Netanyahu almost immediately went out to speak about the event itself and to talk about the heroism of what he called a Jewish individual who tackled one of the gunmen. So let's just see Netanyahu making this statement.
ראינו את הרוע בשפלותו, וראינו גם גבורה יהודית בשיאה. אני ראיתי בדרך הנה סרטון של יהודי שמתנפל על אחד המרצחים, שומט ממנו את הנשק ומציל מי יודע כמה נפשות.
Well, the interesting thing is that I believe he had already been informed that actually that hero came from Syria, actually from Idlib in northwest Syria. He's Ahmed al-Ahmed, a source of pride for family and friends in Syria. He came from a village known as al-Nairab in Idlib. He left Syria in 2006 because, again, many people now are trying to associate him with Al-Qaeda and ISIS because al-Nairab became a headquarters for Jolani's Takfiri thugs from 2011 onwards. This is a recap coming from the BBC this morning. Now, what this mentions, and this has been picked up by a number of commentators, Australian police are investigating a trip taken to the Philippines by two alleged gunmen the month before 15 people were killed at the shooting attack at Bondi Beach. Apparently, they traveled to the country on their Indian passport, and the son, Naveed, using an Australian passport. Border authorities in Manila told the BBC. It's previously been reported that they visited the Philippines to receive military-style training. So let's see where this actual island is. This is Mindanao, which is famous for having had an infiltration of ISIS groups, which we talked about on UK Column some time ago, actually. And it is known as an ISIS training area. Now, this apparently was actually known to the Australian authorities, who had, of course, also had the two individuals on their radar. This was picked up by an account on X known as Propaganda Co. You can watch the whole video. It'll be in the show notes, but this is just the one section relating to what the Australian authorities already knew about the two individuals.
An Australian-born citizen was investigated by the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation for 6 months back in 2019 over close ties to a Sydney-based Islamic State terrorism cell. Authorities feared he was accessing extremist material online and speaking with other radicalized men, but an assessment was made that there was no indication of any ongoing threat or threat of him engaging in violence. Counterterrorism police believed the gunmen pledged allegiance to the ISIS terrorist group prior to carrying out the attack. Two black and white ISIS flags were discovered in the attacker's car, according to a senior official. They always got the flags.
Very true again, but apparently I was actually told by a friend in Sydney that there are Takfiri enclaves where they actually sell Al-Qaeda and ISIS flags in the marketplaces though, so not so unusual. But the fact that they're now trying to tie this in to ISIS, while of course both the US and Israel have supported ISIS in Syria to overthrow the former government. Then we come on to this now very famous selfie taken by Arsen Ostrovsky, who, after being shot and wounded in the head, managed to take a selfie, and also then, when he'd been bandaged up, managed to give very, very lengthy interviews to the media that were actually present. Who is Arsen Ostrovsky? We'll come on to a little report by Nico House, again, that he put out yesterday. But in fact, he's basically at the Marjev Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. What does this translate as? He's in charge of running the propaganda for the Zionist regime, particularly since October the 7th. So let's just play this part of the report by Nico House. Again, you can find the whole report in the show notes.
So you're trying to tell me that one of the victims who was shot at the Bondi Beach shooting is one of Israel's top propagandists who just so happened to be there and October 7th and survived them both. Meet Arsen Ostrovsky, a lawyer who resides in both Australia and in Israel, who just so happened to be at the Bondi Beach shooting and was shot in the head but managed to survive his wounds. Now, I need you all to understand, this guy is one of Israel's top propagandists. It is literally his job to go after any and everybody who criticizes Israel. And it would be one thing if he was a top Israeli propagandist. It was at October 7th and managed to survive. And another thing if he was a top Israeli propagandist, was shot in the head at Bondi Beach and was only there and managed to survive. But when you are at both and you manage to survive both, and your first instinct is to stop, drop, and take a selfie after allegedly being shot in the head, yeah, you're going to get some side eyes. Deservedly so.
Well, I mean, it's a valid point. As I said, all of these are valid points, and I'm sure over time we are going to get a lot more clarity. This is an article that was written by Nate Bear at Substack. He calls it Terror on the Beach, and I actually opened it assuming he would be talking about the Bondi event. In fact, what he's looking at is the fact that, of course, the Zionists have conducted multiple massacres on the beaches of Gaza. He lists them all. This is just one section. In June last year, Israel bombed the tents of displaced people on the Gaza beach. Fishermen have regularly been fired at. Israeli soldiers film themselves enjoying firing water shells at people on the beach. August last year, Israeli gunships once again opened fire on the tents of displaced Palestinians, killing and wounding. August this year, Israel bombed a tent on the beach in Gaza, which had been turned into a makeshift cafe, killing 4. The cafe attack came after the far more deadly cafe attack just a few weeks earlier in late June, which targeted the popular Al-Baka cafeteria and killed 39 people, including a 1-year-old girl and numerous journalists. So, of course, he's making the point that there is a degree of hierarchization of victimhood, and we're seeing it again with the Bondi Beach event. He then does also go on to identify one of the victims, Rabbi Eli Schlanger, who's also, again, very well known. This is from his Instagram page, where he's basically celebrating with the genocidal Zionist forces. And this is a video from him inside the occupied territories talking, or rather channeling Zionist policy. So let's just hear this.
Friends, ladies and gentlemen, I am here at the Marpeset Shel HaMedina, which means the porch of the country. It's an unbelievable place. It's a very, very high peak, and from here you can see half the country. Unbelievable place. Can you imagine if this was in the hands of the Arabs? This is right in the heart of the West Bank. This is why this needs to be in the hands of the Jewish people, because of its security, and obviously the obvious, because it belongs to us, because it's our land. I'm standing over here with a beautiful, beautiful Khayal, soldier, man who has left his family to be able to protect this village at this very, very heightened moment. What's your name?
And my name is Dolev.
Dolev. And Dolev, on behalf of the entire village over here, has received a very, very sizable donation.
So he was obviously very in support of the genocide that's ongoing in Palestine. The Shabbat movement in Bondi also was responsible for raising funds for the IOF since October the 7th. And Nate Baer actually pointed out, again, I think it's a very valid point. He said, actually, rather than being dead, these people should be in The Hague. They should be prosecuted for having raised money to support a genocidal entity while it's slaughtering and exterminating Palestinians for the last 100 years, but of course intensified since October the 7th. And then, of course, we have to also look, this is another potential lead to it being a false flag. Almost immediately, there were claims from Israeli media that Iran could potentially be responsible for the Bondi attack or agents of Iran. Of course, that's been slightly muddied by them having ISIS affiliations. And Hezbollah was also mentioned at some point in the Israeli media. And this report in Jerusalem Post is claiming that should Israel respond, if Iran was behind the attacks, then it would be supported by the United States. So ongoing narratives to watch for here, but clearly not all is as it seems.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the other element to it, obviously being manipulated in Australia, was the proposals for gun control, either across the whole of the country or by sort of state. So it'd be interesting to see which direction that goes in and whether there's going to be a knock-on effect in other places because of that.
Yes. Okay, let's move on then. If you like what the UK column does, we do need your financial support. If you are a member, we want to say thank you very much for all of that, or if you've made a donation. But if you're not, please have a look at the front page of the UK column website. You'll find a link that takes you to a page that explains how you can support us. As I say, we do need your ongoing financial support, and that'd be very much appreciated. If you can't support us financially, then please do share anything you see on the website, because that helps us beat the censorship regime. Now, tonight at 7 p.m., Jeremy will be speaking to Simon Roche on the incoming global catastrophe. So that's at 7. And Carl is talking to Dr. Warwick Paul about China's trade surplus reaching $1 trillion, allegedly. So watch that at 9. Yesterday, Charles, you were speaking to Chris Coverdale.
Yeah, indeed. The second interview with Chris, first one was dealing with the sort of individual issues with paying taxation and how it shouldn't be done because it's used to fund wars. And this is essentially the same theme, but with more of a corporate focus and what people can do when they're working within organizations.
Okay, now next on Friday is our last UK column news of the year, and we'll be doing our usual end of year roundup. But while we're off on the Christmas break, at 1 p.m. most days there'll be some content going out, and most of it will be the presentations from the Cheltenham event that we held earlier this year. So Catherine Gunn, Alex Thompson, Patrick Henningsen, Raja Mir, Brian Gerish, and also the panel discussion that UK column members had. The Q&A, those will all go out at 1 p.m. On most days. Obviously, we're not putting anything out on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and so on, but join us at 1 p.m. for those if you possibly can. Okay, Charles, let's move on then to the question of Freemasonry and the police.
Yes, the Metropolitan Police Service has finally kicked the hornet's nest, and they put out an announcement saying that they have changed the conditions under which people are regarded when they have membership of what's described as a hierarchical organization. So hierarchical organizations added to declarable association policy, and they said specifically that the move follows a consultation of officers and staff, which showed 2/3 of those who responded felt membership of such organizations affects perception of police impartiality and public trust. Now, they went on saying that officers and staff are now required to declare a membership, past or present, of any potentially influential organisation that is hierarchical, has confidential membership, and requires members to support and protect each other. Now, that was one of the particular thorns that the United Grand Lodge of England has taken with the Metropolitan Police Service, as well as the percentage of Metropolitan Police staff that actually took part in the survey that's effectively delivered this result, because it was only about 5% of the total. However, the point about public perception is one that we'll come back to. Now, this changes the situation somewhat according to how it is at the moment. The College of Police Vetting Code of Practice gives a number of reasons why people might be ineligible for joining the police, and that relates to connections to criminals or criminal activity, posing a risk to the public and those who are vulnerable, have a demonstrable lack of honesty, and so forth. Now, the suggestion here is not that membership of the Masons would actually preclude one from being a member of the Metropolitan Police Service, but rather that it's just something that needs to be declared. Now, on the 11th of December, the United Grand Lodge put out a statement entitled Metropolitan Police Update, in which they critically say, "We are disappointed that a decision which potentially affects our members has been taken without open or effective consultation." Now, it might be seen that what they're doing there is effectively giving a tacit admission that they do have undue influence, or indeed certainly that they want to, as part of this process, presumably to overturn it and make sure that doesn't happen. Now, if they're talking about having their members affected by this, how do they mean? I mean, the point of this is purely a declaration that you are a member of such an organisation and nothing beyond that. Anyway, the level of their dissatisfaction has gone further, and just today they've announced that they are going to launch legal action against the Metropolitan Police. And they say that they've made their concerns clear, and that the requirement has the potential to undermine public credibility of Freemasons and could impact negatively on its members. So the same line, in effect, about the priority going to the members of Masonic lodges rather than to the public, and not undermining the credibility of the police by having among their number people who do have conflicts of interest, or at least potential conflicts of interest. Now, the Federation, effectively the union, has come out and issued a short statement in which they say that this is unnecessary and wrong. So doubtless there's going to be quite a bit more back and forth on this particular issue.
Thanks, Charles. Now let's begin. I want to introduce everyone to this company, Zivver. This is a secure communications company. They say Zivver was founded in 2015 in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and they raised $32.2 million in funding from investors, including DN Capital and Dawn Capital. They currently employ around 130 staff with offices in Amsterdam, London, and New York, and provide secure communications for 11,000 organizations. That's what they say. But as their announcement banner at the top of their website shows, they have just been acquired by Kiteworks, and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, Zivver provides cloud-based secure communications solutions specializing in encrypted email, file transfer, and e-signatures, and they market themselves as a European alternative with, quotes, zero knowledge, zero access encryption. And they're saying that neither Zivver nor cloud providers could access customer data, which is apparently not the case, in fact, because content is not encrypted on the user's computer in all situations. It is encrypted on Zivver servers in some situations, so Zivver can read the data before it's transmitted to its destination. Now, this report on screen at the moment cites the news website Follow the Money, which is a Dutch news website, and also cites independent security analysts who discovered the data sent to Zivver's servers are sent in the clear before being encrypted. Now, the headline implies this is a problem because of the acquisition by Kiteworks. And so the question is then, why would that be? Well, it's because Kiteworks is yet another of these Israeli Unit 8200 founded tech companies. Well, actually not founded, but at least run by, hoovering up bulk data from well who, including health data. So their chief executive then is Jonathan Yaron. He has a background in Unit 8200. He was appointed to the board in 2016. He later became chairman and chief executive. He recruited Yaron Gallant, we'll see in a second, also a Unit 8200 graduate. The chief product officer is Amit Toren, that we can see on screen at the moment. He is department head at Israel Defense Forces Intelligence Unit 8200, where he founded and led a special data analytics team that received the Israeli Defense Prize. And we just mentioned Yaron Gallant. Here he is, described as an 8200 graduate and inventor of the web application firewall. He was appointed chief product officer at Kiteworks. And then on top of that, we've got other Israeli executives working for the company, including Ron Margalit, who worked at Unit 8200 before serving in the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Mergers and Acquisitions Director Yuri Kadem is a former Israeli naval captain. So lots of links to Israeli intelligence and the IDF in this. And yet, despite these concerns, multiple NHS trusts and European government agencies continue to use Zivver, though they were originally attracted to it specifically because it was European owned and this idea of data sovereignty in Europe. In the UK, publicly, we know about West Sussex NHS Foundation Trust and a whole host of others because, in fact, the NHS mail system is connected up to this infrastructure as well. I'm just going to say, although Kiteworks is a US company now, it is run by these guys. This data export from the UK to the United States was really enabled by this legislation, the Data Use and Access Act that we were warning about well before it ever became formal legislation. And this is enabling a lot of the bulk data collection surveillance that we're seeing at the moment and the export of that to the United States, where, of course, it falls into the hands of not only Israeli intelligence, but also the AI companies. So we should be absolutely paying attention to what's going on here.
We should. I mean, I think, interesting to have the sort of reference to data sovereignty, which effectively as a concept is made to be utterly laughable in so many ways. I mean, either by people who we might regard as bad actors or by corporations or states who simply want to do what they like.
Yes. We'll undoubtedly discuss that more during Extra. Mark, let me welcome you to the program now and bring us up to date on what's going on with the childhood vaccination schedule in the United States.
Good to be back, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone at UK Column after some domestic and holiday-related breaks there. Interesting thing, it's kind of a scalpel here, you might say, something very precise. RFK and the HHS have made the recommendation, a vote, in fact, by the Vaccine Advisory Committee to end the requirement that all babies at birth should get the hepatitis B vaccine. It might not sound like much, but the critics of RFK and the vaccine industry and the mass media cartel that's basically in the thrall of Big Pharma are all screaming to high heavens. They're saying this is terrible. What it is for 30 years, the Hep B vaccine was required for all newborn babies, no matter what their condition or the condition of the mother. Now, this gets rid of the universal requirement. Now, the Hep B shot will only be limited to those mothers that test positive for hepatitis B. But even then, I believe there'll still be some room for choice. But it basically makes more room for choice and informed consent, which in principle is very important. This slide mentions some of the background. The CDC's advisory committee voted to change the hepatitis B birth dose recommendation, moving towards individual decisions for infants of negative testing mothers. Vaccine skeptical groups have been pushing for this shift away from the universal birth dose mandate, although pediatric groups strongly disagree. So there's a lot of pushback going on. And some of that pushback is from a usual source here. This is from the University of Minnesota, and the pediatricians, at least some of them, are outright rebelling. Pediatricians reject the CDC advisor's guidance and they plan to continue vaccinating all newborns against Hep B. So they're really pushing back hard. Many healthcare providers, including doctors, medical societies, state health departments, etc., are rejecting what they're calling unscientific vaccine recommendations from an influential federal advisory panel, and will instead continue following guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it's kind of a turf war going on here. And this is just some of the responses of the media. The Nation is sort of a center-left publication. They're really making their views known. RFK Jr. is a public health disaster, they're even going so far as to say. But local MAHA laws may be an even bigger threat. And what they're talking about there is the Make America Healthy Again recommendations to reduce fluoride or eliminate fluoride in public water supplies. So they're not just criticizing RFK along vaccine lines. Meanwhile, we have something that you're not hearing much about, and that's an impeachment effort out of Michigan. And this is Haley Stevens, a pretty new member of Congress. As of the 10th of December, Michigan Congresswoman Haley Stevens formally announced articles of impeachment against RFK, Secretary of the Health and Human Services Department, citing what she calls his dangerous actions that have endangered public health and gutted life-saving medical research. And we have a quote from her. Secretary RFK Jr. has turned his back on science, on public health, and on the American people. A bit of hyperbole here, spreading conspiracies and lies, driving up costs and putting lives at risk. And it definitely sounds like she's overstating the case. It's also interesting to note that there is a long way to go. The age requirements from birth to age 6 include hepatitis B, RSV, diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, COVID, flu, measles, MMR, chickenpox, and hepatitis A. And that's the myriad of vaccines that are required for age 0 to 6. So there is a long way to go, but many are seeing this as a good step forward for informed consent, although there's much more that could be done. And I can extrapolate a little more on this in extra if you'd like. But a lot of people aren't hearing about the impeachment effort. I'm putting it all together where most of the media reports this in a very fragmented way. But that's the latest, and we'll see how this develops as this year ends.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much for that. Vanessa, let's move back to the Middle East then. And of course, recently the attack on US military there by ISIS.
Yes, I would argue, I think it's the first attack by ISIS against US military. And the only time that ISIS attacked Israel, they actually apologized for it to Israel back in 2017. So people should pay attention to that when the US and Trump in particular is claiming that he's in Syria to fight against ISIS. Of course, ISIS is another proxy of the US that has been used to overthrow the former Syrian government and to destabilize Iraq also. So on the 15th of December, 3 Americans were killed in Syria, in Palmyra, and I'll show that on the map in a second, by ISIS, and ISIS terrorists were members of the Iowa National Guard. So that was 2 of the 3 Americans killed. Let's have a look actually where the attack took place. It was in really central, can't be any more central than that, in Palmyra, which actually traditionally was an ISIS-held area. Just before the fall of Damascus, the Syrian Arab Army had been running a campaign in exactly that area to try and clean out the ISIS terrorist cells that were still operating there and that had conducted attacks against the Syrian army and which led to massacres of the Syrian Arab Army personnel at that time. Pete Hegseth went on X in his usual rational way. The savage who perpetrated this attack was killed by partner forces. Let it be known, if you target Americans anywhere in the world, this has obviously come from AI, you will spend the rest of your brief, anxious life knowing that the United States will hunt you, find you, and ruthlessly kill you. So again, demonstrating that he's perfectly of sound mind when he's putting posts on X. This was from Ambassador Tom Barrack, Trump's economic hitman in the region, strongly condemning the cowardly terrorist ambush targeting a joint US-Syrian government patrol. They had been warned of the potential for attack. No one had taken any notice of it. And then a response there from Karim Franceschi, who's a Kurdish supporter. With respect, Ambassador, you helped legitimize a faction whose security apparatus is full of recycled ISIS and Nusra, al-Qaeda and Syria fighters. You pushed to replace the SDF, the only force that actually broke ISIS. I would disagree with that, with HTS, a group that absorbed them. Now US troops are dead. Now he's making a valid point. The US actually supported ISIS, and as President Assad said in one interview, if you supporting terrorism is like putting a scorpion in your pocket. I'm paraphrasing. Eventually the scorpion will sting you and kill you. Now what is particularly interesting, and there is a photo circulating on social media, but I can't verify it, but this was in Le Monde today. The Syrian who killed the Americans was actually part of the security forces. So he was actually part of Jolani's entourage, albeit ISIS. But then again, this shows the ridiculousness of Jolani being made part of the coalition against ISIS when the majority of his Takfiri forces are in reality de facto ISIS. But then let's see what excuse Jolani and the new Syria authorities came up with. So basically, they said, well, no, hang on, we were about to sack this guy. But actually, we were waiting until Monday. This was from another report, because Saturday is an administrative holiday. Well, believe that, and I've got a bridge somewhere else to sell you. But anyway, they were going to sack him, just as the White Helmets were going to sack a White Helmet that was involved in the execution of Syrian Arab Army soldiers back in 2016. And then he reappeared in White Helmet promo videos about a month later. So, let's take that with a pinch of salt. And then what is happening, of course, as I said, after Jolani was made part of the anti-ISIS coalition, ISIS would use this as a very successful recruitment drive, because the majority of Jolani's Takfiri forces were ISIS. Now, many of them have left and have defected to the official ISIS organization. And this was in the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights this morning, an alarming development. Gunmen in military uniforms with ISIS patches established makeshift checkpoints in Aleppo and Deir ez-Zor, so in effectively the north of Syria and the northeast. And in fact, one of Jolani's security forces was killed this morning by an an unknown assailant, masked assailant. No guesses for who that might be. So in my opinion, either the US is trying to stoke some kind of civil war between Jolani's less Takfiri entourage against a newly reinforced ISIS, of course reinforced by the US and Israel effectively, or the US is looking to carry out a bombing campaign on Syria on the basis that American forces are getting killed.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's come back to the United Kingdom. And Charles, Online Safety Act, obviously the petition got quite a response. What happened?
Well, very little, unfortunately. And as Mike says, there was a petition earlier in the year which attracted over 500,000 signatures, and this was therefore debated in Westminster Hall just on Monday. And the question to be asked is, who cares? That it was very, very sparsely attended, and indeed only by people who were in support of it. So it looks very much like there was absolutely no resistance to censorship whatsoever, and that is in stark contrast with the attendance at the debate into digital ID, which took place the previous week. Now, the debate was led by Lewis Atkinson, and in the many remarks he did make was to say, my only regret is that the few members of the House who have publicly called for outright repeal of the Online Safety Act were not here this afternoon. So now, how one explains that is not really totally clear, but we'll just show a short clip of Lewis Atkinson in his closing remarks, of course, having had absolutely no pushback during the entire debate.
as a result. I think it's entirely natural that the first attempt at regulation and legislation will not ever get everything right and will require evolution. The Online Safety Act was a landmark moment at attempting to regulate online harms. And I think it's fair to say that the consensus that we've heard today is that needs to evolve, that we shouldn't be looking to repeal, but to evolve at pace and ensure implementation at pace to ensure that we tackle those online harms in a way that is consistent with our British values and those freedoms of expression and association that we've heard about.
So that's basically what the government are taking from that petition. They got a couple of things wrong, but they should now proceed at pace.
Yes, because we've got to accelerate everything all the time.
We have.
We do, yeah. Okay, well, I suppose in a sense related to this, the Trump lawsuit against the BBC, which was that yesterday? It was announced. The way time goes, it's hard to say, but this is what the BBC had on their thing. BBC says it will defend Trump over defamation lawsuit over Panorama speech edit. Well, it's not $5 billion as they reported. There's what they said about it. They're going to defend themselves against a $5 billion lawsuit. Well, before we clarify exactly what the amount is, let's just look at what Trump had to say. I'm sorry to do this, but we just thought there's certain comedy value in it.
In a little while, you'll be seeing I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth. Literally, they put words in my mouth. They had me saying things that I never said coming out. I guess they used AI or something. So we'll be bringing that lawsuit. A lot of people are asking, when are you bringing that lawsuit? Even the media can't believe that one. They actually put terrible words in my mouth having to do with January 6th that I didn't say. And the beautiful words that I said, right? The beautiful words, talking about patriotism and all of the good things that I said, they didn't say that, but they put terrible words. They actually have me speaking with words that I never said, and they got caught because I believe somebody at BBC said, this is so bad, it has to be reported. That's called fake news. So we'll be filing that suit probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
What did those three chaps do wrong to have to stand behind him?
Well, indeed, good question. But anyway, as I say, it's not $5 billion. Because it's $10 billion. So the lawsuit is seeking $5 billion in damages for defamation. For defamation and another $5 billion under Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. So more information if we have a look at this tweet here from Judicial Hub, and they have, I think, on that Twitter thread, they have links to the actual suit itself. The BBC had, of course, as we reported, issued a formal apology. Saying that their editing gave the mistaken impression that President Trump had made a direct call for violent action. And they also reported that the Trump team never responded to BBC's apology. But their apology sort of gave the impression that they had created the impression, that Trump had incited violence and that was unintentional on their part. Well, that clearly hasn't gone down well with Trump. They said on the 15th, which was Monday, we're not going to make further comment on ongoing legal proceedings. But here's the thing. Also on Monday, Trump suspended the tech prosperity deal with the UK in what is being reported as a major setback. So if you remember, this was the whole business of the new UK-US energy partnership powering 1.5 million British homes. And let's not forget Stargate UK as well. So that has apparently been suspended as a result of the BBC's actions here. I haven't really seen that much coverage of that particular aspect of this in any of the British press. So I just thought best to mention it. But where does that bring us then? Back to Mark then, and sticking with Trump and tariffs.
Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, this is a really big issue, bigger than meets the eye. You might recall April 2nd, and I covered it some on UK Column after that Trump introduced a major tariff initiative, and it would rescue America from what was basically deemed as a would-be or actual economic emergency. And so before we talk about the Lutnick family for a moment, before we do that, a Supreme Court decision is hanging in the balance. It could happen any day, conceivably, even later today, probably after the new year. and that Supreme Court decision would cancel Trump's ability to carry out his tariff policy under a emergency law in 1977. That's when that law was passed, and that law gave Trump delegated authority from Congress to enact tariff laws on his own as long as an emergency threshold was made. Otherwise, you would have to default to the U.S. Constitution, where under Section 8, tariff policy, trade policy is up to Congress. And Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution says that all bills for raising revenue shall be in the House of Representatives. The only way to get an exception to that is to have a statute. That's the key here. Now, briefly, meanwhile, the Lutnick family, Howard Lutnick, of course, is the Commerce Secretary under Trump. They've been angling. Let's show this. This hasn't been reported much, only in a piecemeal fashion and not with a lot of hoopla. They're angling to make a lot of money if the court votes down Trump's tariff policy, the Supreme Court. What they would basically do is they'd approach the importing companies, the ones that pay the brunt of the tariff taxes, and they would give them some money and say, here, take a couple million each and you'll be happy. And in return, Howard Lutnick, who divested himself of this direct involvement of this, but his son, Brandon Lutnick, is head of the company now, Cantor Fitzgerald. So the son has taken over because Howard is Commerce Secretary, but nevertheless, it's the Lutnick family. Anyway, they'd pay off the importing families, and then that would give the Lutnick business, Cantor Fitzgerald, rights to collect the full payback that the Trump administration would have to do, paying back the money it had collected through the tariffs. So the Lutnick family's business here stands to make a killing if the Supreme Court rules against Trump's tariffs. A very illicit and rather, repellent development, you might say. A lot of corruption here, a lot of robber baron kind of behavior. Now let's move on real briefly. And basically, the rest is the Supreme Court's pending decision. The rest of the slides basically outline that. And this slide here we can show very briefly. This is the main thing. The Supreme Court ruling on EPA, that's the 1977 law. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that's what gives the president this exception from congressional power and allows him to regulate commerce during national emergencies. Yes, we ran huge trade deficits with China realizing huge record surpluses. That's all true. Did it ever constitute an economic emergency? Probably not. Something of a crisis, something of a economic problem for sure. This is something from the Peterson Institute. Will the Supreme Court determine the fate of Trump tariffs? That's something else that'll be in the show notes, but that's sufficient for the slides. It boils down to this being a bellwether decision, guys, as to whether Trump's tariff policy will stand. So once the Supreme Court makes that decision any time now, then it's just a question of whether Trump will appeal to other laws that are on the books that might give him some wiggle room. Otherwise, he'll have to defer to Congress under the Constitution. So there's billions of dollars at stake here. The Lutnick family engaging in hanky-panky like we're seeing, and many other matters, and it'll change very quickly. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for that. Let's finish then, Charles, with farming.
Yes, and via an examination of the finance bill, the second reading of which took place yesterday, and that has resulted in 2 days' worth of committee hearings on a number of the provisions therein. Now, one of those is the proposed changes to inheritance tax for farmers and business owners. And I just have a video clip really to illustrate how parliamentary democracy works, or indeed doesn't, as expressed by comments made during a meeting of the Liaison Committee on Monday. And we'll see Alan Carmichael, who's the chair of the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs Committee, asking the Prime Minister about what would appear to be a vindictive attack on smaller farms via the changes to agricultural property relief.
It's an economic reform which we took in the budget before last, not targeted. It is to adjust the rate at which inheritance tax is, the fact that it's paid the rate at which it's paid and the period over which it is paid. But it's not targeted against individuals. I'm not arguing with you that there are therefore going to be individuals affected, as there are with any change in any tax regime. But there's a difference between changing the tax regime and targeting a group of individuals. This is about changing the tax regime.
The anti-forestalling clause that we've spoken about traps farmers into the new rules. It doesn't allow them the same opportunities that other taxpayers will have to use tax planning to manage their affairs in a sensible way that will allow the succession of family farms in this country.
That doesn't make it targeted. It is a necessary consequence of the decisions that we've taken. But I can assure you, as you would expect, the President of the NFU has raised this issue with me on more than one occasion.
Not just the President of the NFU.
Well, I appreciate that.
You've heard it from Cat Smith, you've heard it from my Select Committee, you've heard it from the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, you've heard it from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. These are all select committees, incidentally, that have majorities from the Labour Party, and they have all produced unanimous reports calling for this to be paused and rethought. You don't have to listen to me. You don't even have to listen to the farmers out there. You don't have to listen to the President of the NFU. But why do you not listen to your own party colleagues?
I do listen to party colleagues all the time.
And then do what you're going to do anyway.
The last word going to Alan Carmichael. And it should be noted that the projected return from changing this inheritance tax threshold would be £500 million in the year, which is equivalent to 1 day's pay for the National Health Service. When we think back to what Blaise Metrowelli and Richard Knighton were saying about resilience and a whole of society approach, in fact, it seems nothing more than a drive for corporate capture and a sort of deliberate destruction of the establishment of certainly the rural economy as it stands. There we are.
Thank you, Charles. Well, lots to talk about in extra. We will be there in a few minutes. If you are a UK Column member, stay on the live stream for that. But we got to leave it there for today. Enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy Germ and Carl tonight. We'll be back for news at 1 p.m. as usual on Friday. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.